Mr. SASHI Kumar to speak a few words.
Honorable Justice PRABHA SRIDEVAN, my good old friend Tamilanban, other distinguished dignitaries on the stage, and distinguished audience. It's indeed a privilege for me to be part of a function which is felicitating Tamilanban. My association with him is rather different from what yours might be. You know him as a poet, as a professor, as someone who has illuminated the language of Tamil. I know him as a news presenter in Tamil when I was doing news in English, in Doordarshan. And at that time, that may be the most insignificant thing he probably did in his life, but that is how I know him. And it always was wonderful to hear him because his Tamil, when he spoke his Tamil on the screen and off the screen when I saw him in the studios of Doordarshan, our producer who used to produce the news there is with us today, Mr. Sampath Kumar. It was always a wonderful experience to hear Tamilanban speak. And as we went along, of course, I began to know him as someone who cherished the human values that were spoken about here, progressive values, progressive human values, liberal human values. He stood for causes that were right. He wrote about causes apparently, obviously, that were right and important, particularly important in this day and time. We share a common passion, I think, for Pablo Neruda, and I had occasion to exchange notes with him on this at one time. And in my mind, when I see his translated poems here in the big volume that he was kind enough to send me, I can see why Neruda is perhaps his most favorite foreign poet, because he is of the same mold. His thinking is of the same mold, his passion is of the same mold, his aspirations for humankind are of the same mold. So it's a great pleasure and honor to be here. For me, poetry is something that is, I think, far more intimate, far more important, far more dear than even literature or any other pursuit in life. I think it was Plato who said that poetry comes closer to vital truth than history, because you can write reams and reams of history and the truth can elude you. After all, history is the narrative of the conqueror. History is the narrative of the victor, not of the defeated. So you can write history and history is not the truth, we know. In a world of information, we are living in the digital age where information is before us, behind us, on all sides of us. We are awash with information. And yet, the truth eludes us. So it is poetry. It is in perhaps 4 lines of a haiku poem that truth suddenly is glimpsed. Intuitive truth, the truth that we think is the essence of living, is the essence of human endeavor. It is in a sculptor's language that truth comes to us. It is in the painting, it is in artistry, it is in the creative endeavor, in short, that truth comes to us. And therefore, poetry is perhaps an elevated, a very, very important endeavor. Those who write poetry, I think, are blessed in that sense, and those who read them, of course, are also blessed and privileged in that sense. Tamilanban's collection of poetry is remarkable. I have had occasion to just browse through it, and his figure of speech, his turn of metaphor, his imaginativeness is truly astounding. When he speaks about an ocean which is bemoaning the death of every wave, you know, it's like the ocean as a mother, and the ocean is after all about waves, at least on the shores when we see the ocean, and the ocean which is lamenting the death of every wave. That is figure of speech. That is metaphor which is truly poetic. It's a quantum leap of imagination. I mentioned haiku poetry, and I understand that the one to introduce the haiku poetry into Tamil, or to give us a glimpse of what haiku poetry is all about in our own context, is Tamilanban. And therefore, he has many firsts to his credit. I might, at the risk of introducing a controversial note here, say that it's truly pathetic and dismal that a poet of this stature, who is probably the best known or the most important or one of the most important living poets in Tamil, has been accorded with such little recognition by the state. When I say state, the capital state, not necessarily Tamil Nadu state. Tamilanban, from all accounts, is deserving of the highest awards in the literary firmament, and I think it reflects on the nature of the awards, or the process of the awards, or the politics of the awards, that he hasn't been given the highest award yet in poetry. But that's not surprising, because we have had geniuses of that nature who have gone relatively or less recognized in terms of awards, not in terms of the impact that they have made in the minds of their readers, or in terms of posterity. M.D. Ramanathan is a very good example in Carnatic music, perhaps one of the best Carnatic musicians, most versatile Carnatic musicians, who was under-awarded or not awarded literally throughout his career. There are many others. In the light music, Vishwanathan, of Vishwanathan Ramurthy fame, the kind of generations he has inspired with his music, and yet went relatively unrecognized in terms of awards. And therefore, that may not even be a criterion, that may not be a measure to get a measure of the man. That may not be the way one needs to look at what a person is. But it is really a telling comment on how little we, or how lackadaisical, or how, shall we say, the lapses in terms of which the awards make a difference. I'd just like to draw attention to some poems that I thought were fantastic in his collection. I mean, at least in the way I browsed it. For instance, there is a wonderful poem called That Word. That Word, you can understand the poet's creative process. He's sitting and writing his lines as they come to him, and then this one word eludes him. This one word doesn't fit into it. This one word is like an eel. It just keeps escaping him. In the poem, and I'd just like to read these few lines. In the poem, a word got lost somewhere. Meaning lost its vibration. Vocal cords trembled in utter disarray. Hoping to fill the gap, placed a piece of diamond in the empty slot. Waves of darkness in procession in the blood vessels of the poem. Placed a silver of rainbow. It won't work. Tried to fit a flower in the steaming breath of the other words, it withered and dropped. Brought a smile from a damsel lovely, a flutter in all the lines of the poem. At a loss was I. My child returned after playing in the street. Oh, the missing word in the poem flashed in his little eyes. See how wonderful the evocation of how words fit in has come in his poetry. A letter retrieved. Another poem. Dad, I've lost touch. I'm sorry, Dad, I have got lost. Pray not search for me. Post not my picture in magazine, TV, commercials. And brought home whereabouts informed, awaits gift handsome. No announcements, please. Tell not kith and kin and wail in unison. I have disappeared only to seek and find myself. Till I find out joy there is in getting lost. So, worry not about me, none whatever. Son's name is Jnanan as the one who knows. So, many of you obviously know these poems, and some of you may have read it in Tamil, but it's wonderful. And imagine how he captures the mood of a morning, a collage is the title of the poem. Rainy night broke the dawn with a drizzle. Mild sun stuck its aerial roots with ashen rays, filtering through the trees in the house complex. I'm skipping a para. Then he says, like a carelessly shaved face, delicate strands of grass on the jaw and cheek rims of the front yard. It's just like your face in the morning, actually. A carelessly shaved face, delicate strands of grass on the jaw and cheek rims of the front yard. Again, I'm skipping a para. And then he says, perched on the wire fence, crows poke their beaks into the two wings alternately. In their curved neck, infant sun showers its light and glistens. And then again, after a few paras, books and kids getting stuffed into school bags. That's the morning scene, right? Books and kids getting stuffed into school bags in a tearing hurry. Attempt to close resisted by obstinate lunchbox. Spilling curd rice, litter of rice particles, seeming replication of an absent column in the front yard. Weighed down by loaded shoulder bag and a heavy mind stepping into the street. The sky scripted the 8:30 sun. The office bus brimming with last night. The office bus brimming with last night as so many humans barely space for me. Outside the bus, the morning. This is almost T.S. Eliot. This is almost T.S. Eliot, you know, in terms of describing just a day and what one does in a day and how one relates to a day in the morning. In this case, perhaps in T.S. Eliot's case, it's the evening that inspires him more. And finally, just one more example. It's called The Last Wish. What is the last wish? The sea said, to ask like this, let there be no shores. To ask like this, let there be no shores. Let that be the last wish, in other words. What is the last wish? Said the sky. The question is to be raised at the last star. What is the last wish? The earth said, a poet and a poem should stop my revolution and grant me rest. What is the last wish? Man said, must return to the first man and liberate my typical breath. What is the last wish? The bud said, my first wish itself is not fulfilled. Why hurry to the last wish? This is the sense. This gives you a sense of Tamilanban, the poet. Tamilanban, the rebel, if you like. I think there is rebellion in his poetry. There is beauty. There is aesthetic wonder. There is great consummateness. There is great accomplishment in his poetry. But I find what appeals to me most is his sense of crying for justice, his sense of impatience in an unjust world, his sense that humanity has been shortchanged by the forces that are around us. So a Tamilanban who rebels against that, who is constantly bringing that to the fore, are his wonderful lines. And I think his relevance is even more significant in this day and age as we fight forces of intolerance, as we are living in a situation where our mental horizons are shrinking rather than expanding, and where the vision of another great poet who similarly had great vision for humanity, for India. In fact, he wrote that poem 25 or 30 years, nearly 30 years before independence. And I'm talking here about the Nobel laureate and poet Rabindranath Tagore, when he wrote that poem, which has been the aspirational poem for every Indian, and which today is going through his greatest period of challenge, when he wrote, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where words come out from the depth of truth, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. That is the same sentiment, that is the same emotion that Tamilanban carries. I wish him many more years of such powerful language, of such evocative language, of such wonderful imagination, and such wonderful figure of speech. Thank you very much.